The morning sun cast long shadows across Heathrow Airport's Terminal 5 as passengers hurried through the busy corridors. Among them walked Captain James Morrison, a decorated member of the Royal Guard who had served the British Crown for over 15 years. His perfectly pressed uniform displayed ribbons earned through years of dedicated service, and his confident stride spoke of a man accustomed to respect and protocol. James had been looking forward to this trip for months. After completing a grueling 6-month deployment, he was finally returning home to see his family. His wife Sarah had surprised him with a first-class ticket on British Airways Flight 447 to New York, where she was waiting with their 2 young children. It was meant to be a celebration of his homecoming and a well-deserved treat after his long service. The ticket had cost Sarah nearly 3 months of her salary as a nurse, but she felt her husband deserved the luxury after his sacrifice. James carried his boarding pass carefully, checking the seat number repeatedly. 2A, first class. He had never flown first class before, and despite his military discipline, he couldn't hide a small smile of anticipation. As he approached the gate, James noticed the usual mix of business travelers and tourists. Some passengers recognized his uniform and nodded respectfully, while others seemed curious about his military decorations. He had grown accustomed to the attention over the years, understanding that his uniform represented something larger than himself. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, calling first-class passengers to board. James gathered his small carry-on bag, which contained mainly personal items and a few gifts for his children. His military training had taught him to travel light, and he appreciated the simplicity of having everything he needed in one small bag. Walking down the jet bridge, James felt a mixture of excitement and relief. The past months had been challenging, filled with long days and difficult conditions. The thought of relaxing in a comfortable seat while crossing the Atlantic seemed almost too good to be true. He had read about first-class amenities online, imagining the extra space and better food that awaited him. As he stepped onto the aircraft, the flight attendant at the door greeted him with a professional smile. The cabin was elegant, with wide seats covered in cream leather and soft lighting that created a warm atmosphere. James located seat 2A and was pleased to find it was a window seat, perfect for watching the landscape below during takeoff. He carefully stowed his bag in the overhead compartment and settled into his seat. The leather was soft and comfortable, and he marveled at the amount of legroom available. An amenity kit sat on his seat, along with a menu that featured dishes he had only heard about in expensive restaurants. For a moment, he allowed himself to truly relax, something that had been rare during his recent deployment. Other first-class passengers began boarding, most dressed in expensive business suits or designer clothing. James was aware that his military uniform made him stand out, but he had every right to be there. His ticket was valid, his seat was assigned, and he had paid the same price as everyone else through his wife's generous gift. A flight attendant approached with a warm smile, offering him a welcome drink. James politely declined alcohol, requesting water instead, explaining that he was still officially on duty until he reached his destination. The attendant seemed charmed by his politeness and professionalism, commenting on how refreshing it was to meet someone so courteous. As more passengers settled in around him, James pulled out a small photo of his family. His wife Sarah looked radiant in the picture, holding their 5-year-old daughter Emma while their 3-year-old son Michael played nearby. They had been separated for too long, and he couldn't wait to hold them again. The first-class ticket felt like the perfect beginning to what he hoped would be a wonderful reunion. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming passengers aboard and announcing the flight details. James checked his watch, noting they were on schedule for departure. Everything seemed perfect as he prepared for what he expected to be a comfortable and relaxing flight home to his family. Little did James know that his peaceful journey was about to take an unexpected and controversial turn that would change not only his travel plans, but also spark a legal battle that would make headlines around the world. The next few hours would test everything he believed about fairness, respect, and the rights of those who serve their country. 20 minutes before scheduled departure, the atmosphere in first class began to change. James noticed increased activity among the flight crew, with attendants whispering urgently among themselves and frequently checking their watches. The right? boarding process, which had been proceeding smoothly, suddenly seemed more hurried and tense. A well-dressed man in his 60s approached the first-class cabin, followed closely by two younger companions who appeared to be assistants. James couldn't help but notice the expensive cut of the man's suit and the confident way he carried himself. The newcomer surveyed the cabin with the air of someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted when he wanted it. Head flight attendant Rebecca Martinez approached the distinguished passenger with a level of deference that James hadn't seen her show to other travelers. She spoke in hushed, respectful tones, occasionally glancing toward James's seat. The conversation was too quiet for James to hear clearly, but he could sense an undercurrent of urgency in their discussion. The distinguished passenger, whom James would later learn was prominent businessman Richard Blackwood, gestured toward seat 2A while speaking animatedly with Rebecca. His voice began to rise slightly, though he maintained the polished tone of someone used to boardroom negotiations. James couldn't make out the exact words, but phrases like extremely important and must be resolved immediately drifted across the cabin. Rebecca's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation continued. She kept glancing between her clipboard, James and Mr. Blackwood, clearly struggling with whatever decision she was being asked to make. Other first-class passengers began to notice the tension, with several turning in their seats to observe the unfolding drama. James remained focused on his magazine, respecting the privacy of their conversation while staying alert to the situation developing around him. His military training had taught him to be aware of his surroundings without appearing to eavesdrop. However, when Rebecca began walking in his direction, he realized the conversation somehow involved him. "Excuse me, sir," Rebecca said, her voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that barely masked her obvious discomfort. "I'm terribly sorry to bother you, but we have a small situation that's developed, and I was hoping you might be able to help us resolve it." James looked up from his magazine, giving Rebecca his full attention. "Of course, how can I help?" he replied, his natural inclination being to assist whenever possible. His years of service had ingrained in him a deep sense of duty and helpfulness toward others. Rebecca glanced nervously toward Mr. Blackwood before continuing. "Well, you see, we've had a very important passenger arrive at the last minute, and there seems to have been a mix-up with the seating arrangements. He's traveling on urgent business, and his usual seat preference is 2A. James felt a flutter of confusion. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. My ticket clearly shows seat 2A, and I checked in online yesterday to confirm it. My wife purchased this ticket months ago." He pulled out his boarding pass to show Rebecca, pointing to the clearly printed seat assignment. "Oh yes, I can see that your ticket is completely valid," Rebecca said quickly. "This isn't about the validity of your ticket at all. It's just that this particular passenger has some special requirements, and we were wondering if you might consider moving to another seat to accommodate him." The request struck James as odd. In all his years of travel, both military and civilian, he had never been asked to give up a properly assigned seat for another passenger's preferences. He remained polite but felt compelled to understand the situation better. "What kind of special requirements?" James asked reasonably. "Is there a medical issue or some other emergency? If someone needs this seat for health reasons, I'm certainly willing to help, but I'd like to understand what's happening." Rebecca's discomfort became more apparent as she struggled to find an adequate explanation. "While it's not exactly a medical issue, Mr. Blackwood is a very frequent flyer with our airline, and seat 2A is his preferred location. He's conducting important business during the flight, and specifically needs this seat for his work." James processed this information with growing bewilderment. The explanation seemed insufficient to justify asking him to move from his assigned seat. Every passenger in first class had presumably paid for their tickets and chosen their seats for their own reasons. The idea that frequent flyer status alone could override confirmed seat assignments seemed both unfair and potentially discriminatory. "I appreciate that he's a valued customer," James replied diplomatically, "but I also have important reasons for being in this seat. This is a gift from my wife, and I've been looking forward to this flight for months. Surely there are other available seats that would meet his needs just as well." The tension in the cabin continued to build as other passengers began to take notice of the extended conversation. Mr. Blackwood himself appeared to be growing impatient, checking his expensive watch and speaking more urgently to his assistants. The situation was clearly escalating beyond what anyone had initially expected. Rebecca looked increasingly desperate as she realized her initial diplomatic approach wasn't working. The pressure from Mr. Blackwood was evident, and she seemed caught between competing demands with no clear resolution in sight. What had started as a simple request was rapidly becoming a confrontation that would test everyone involved. The situation escalated quickly when Mr. Blackwood decided to approach James directly. His polished businessman demeanor remained intact, but there was an unmistakable edge of authority in his voice as he introduced himself. "Good afternoon. I'm Richard Blackwood. I believe there's been some confusion about seating arrangements that we need to sort out promptly." James stood respectfully, extending his hand. "Captain James Morrison, Royal Guard. Nice to meet you, sir. I understand. You'd prefer this seat, but as you can see, it's properly assigned to me. Perhaps we can find another solution that works for everyone." Mr. Blackwood's expression hardened slightly at James's polite but firm response. "Captain Morrison, I'm sure you're a fine soldier, but you need to understand that some situations require flexibility. I'm conducting business worth millions of pounds during this flight, and I specifically need this window seat for privacy and optimal lighting for my documents." The condescending tone wasn't lost on James, who maintained his military composure despite feeling increasingly frustrated. "Mr. Blackwood, I respect your business needs, but I also have legitimate reasons for this seat. My wife saved for months to buy me this ticket as a homecoming gift. This isn't just about preference. It's about honoring her sacrifice and my own right as a paying passenger." Other first-class passengers were now openly watching the exchange. Some appeared sympathetic to James, while others seemed uncomfortable with the growing tension. The cabin had become noticeably quiet except for the conversation between the two men and the occasional whispered comment from nervous onlookers. Rebecca attempted to mediate, suggesting various alternative solutions. "Mr. Blackwood, Seat 1A, is also available and offers excellent privacy. Captain Morrison, Seat 3C is a lovely aisle seat with extra legroom." Both men politely but firmly declined the alternatives, each believing they had the stronger claim to Seat 2A. The standoff continued for several more minutes, with neither man willing to back down. Mr. Blackwood's patience was clearly wearing thin, and he began making increasingly pointed comments about understanding one's place and recognizing when to be accommodating to one's betters. These remarks stung James, who had spent his career serving his country with honor and dignity. Finally, Mr. Blackwood played what he believed was his trump card. He pulled out his phone and made a brief call, speaking quietly but urgently. Within minutes, a man in a supervisor's uniform appeared at the entrance to first class. David Chen, the senior flight supervisor, approached the group with obvious reluctance. "Gentlemen, I understand we have a seating issue that needs immediate resolution," David said diplomatically. "Mr. Blackwood, Captain Morrison, I'd like to find a solution that satisfies everyone, but we really need to resolve this quickly so we can depart on schedule." Mr. Blackwood wasted no time in presenting his case. "David, I've been flying with this airline for over 20 years. I'm a Platinum Elite member, and I specifically requested Seat 2A when I booked this last-minute ticket. This gentleman seems unwilling to be reasonable about relocating to accommodate a long-time customer." James felt compelled to defend himself. "Sir, with respect, I'm not being unreasonable. I have a valid ticket with an assigned seat that I've held for months. Mr. Blackwood's frequent flyer status doesn't override my confirmed reservation. I'm simply asking to keep the seat I paid for and was assigned." David found himself in an impossible position. Company policy generally supported confirmed seat assignments, but Mr. Blackwood was indeed one of their most valuable customers, someone who generated hundreds of thousands of pounds in annual revenue for the airline. The pressure from above to keep such customers satisfied was immense. After a moment of consideration, David made a decision that would prove to be both controversial and legally problematic. Captain Morrison, I understand your position and your ticket is absolutely valid. However, given the circumstances and Mr. Blackwood's special status with our airline, I'm going to have to ask you to accept a relocation to seat 3C. The decision hit James like a physical blow. Despite his military training and following orders, this felt fundamentally wrong and unfair. Sir, I respectfully disagree with this decision. I've done nothing wrong, my ticket is valid, and I've been cooperative throughout this entire discussion. Moving me simply because another passenger has more money or status feels discriminatory. David's expression showed he understood James's point, but he felt trapped by company politics and customer service pressures. Captain Morrison, I assure you this isn't about discrimination. It's simply about customer service and finding the best solution for all involved. We'd be happy to offer you a voucher for future travel as compensation for the inconvenience. The offer of compensation only made James more determined to stand his ground. This isn't about vouchers or compensation. This is about fairness and treating all passengers with equal respect, regardless of their wealth or status. I served my country to protect principles like equality and justice, and I won't give up my rightful seat simply because someone else believes they're entitled to it. The confrontation had now attracted the attention of passengers throughout the aircraft, and the departure delay was becoming noticeable. What had started as a simple seating preference had evolved into a clash of principles that neither side seemed willing to abandon. The atmosphere in the cabin became increasingly tense as James refused to move from his assigned seat. David Chen found himself under growing pressure from multiple directions. Mr. Blackwood was becoming more agitated. Other passengers were getting restless due to the delay, and the ground crew was signaling that departure needed to happen soon to maintain the flight schedule. Rebecca approached David with a concerned expression, whispering urgently in his ear. David, we're already 15 minutes behind schedule. Air traffic control is asking for our departure time and the captain wants to know how much longer this will take. The passengers in economy are starting to complain about the delay. Mr. Blackwood seized on this information, raising his voice slightly so other passengers could hear. This is exactly what I was concerned about. One person's stubbornness is now affecting everyone on this flight. Captain Morrison, surely you can see that your inflexibility is causing problems for hundreds of other passengers. James felt the weight of accusation but refused to accept responsibility for a situation he hadn't created. Mr. Blackwood, I'm not the one who created this problem. I'm simply occupying the seat I was assigned months ago. If anyone is causing delays, it's the person who arrived at the last minute expecting special treatment. The exchange caught the attention of other, first-class passengers, several of whom began voicing their own opinions. An elderly woman in seat 1C spoke up. Excuse me, but I think the soldier should keep his seat. He has every right to be there, and this whole situation seems terribly unfair to him. However, a businessman in seat 4A disagreed. Look, we all just want to get to our destination on time. If moving seats solves the problem, why not just be reasonable about it? Sometimes you have to compromise for the greater good. The divided opinions among passengers only added to the pressure David was feeling. He was acutely aware that his decision would be scrutinized by his superiors, and Mr. Blackwood had already hinted that he would be filing complaints with airline management about the handling of the situation. James remained calm but resolute, his military bearing evident in his straight posture and measured responses. I understand everyone wants to depart on time, and so do I. But I won't be bullied into giving up my rights as a paying customer. If Mr. Blackwood had arrived on time and requested seat 2A during the normal booking process, we wouldn't be having this conversation. David made one final attempt at diplomacy. Captain Morrison, what if we upgraded you to our premium business class seat? It has many of the same amenities as first class, and we'd provide a full refund of the difference in fare, plus additional compensation for your inconvenience. The offer was genuinely generous, but James saw it as missing the point entirely. Sir, this isn't about the amenities or the money. It's about the principle. If you can force me to move today because I'm less wealthy or influential than Mr. Blackwood, what stops you from doing the same thing to other passengers tomorrow? Where does this treatment end? Mr. Blackwood's patience finally reached its breaking point. This is absolutely ridiculous. I have important international clients waiting for my call, contracts worth millions that need to be reviewed during this flight, and we're being held up by someone who's treating this like some kind of philosophical debate. David, I expect you to handle this situation immediately. The pressure was now immense, and David felt he had no choice but to escalate the situation. He made a decision that would later be heavily criticized in court documents and media reports. Captain Morrison, I'm going to have to insist that you relocate to seat 3C. If you continue to refuse, I'll have no option but to ask security to escort you from the aircraft. The threat of security involvement sent a shockwave through the first-class cabin. Several passengers gasped audibly, and the elderly woman who had earlier supported James spoke up again. This is absolutely disgraceful. You're going to call security on a man who served his country, all because some rich businessman wants his preferred seat? James felt a mixture of anger, disappointment, and disbelief. In all his years of service, he had faced dangerous situations and difficult challenges, but he had never expected to be threatened with removal from an aircraft for simply occupying his assigned seat. The situation had escalated far beyond anything he could have imagined when he boarded the plane. "Sir, I want to be absolutely clear about what's happening here," James said, his voice steady despite his emotions. "You're threatening to have me removed from this aircraft, not because I've done anything wrong, not because I don't have a valid ticket, and not because I've been disruptive or rude. You're threatening me because a wealthy passenger wants my seat, and you're more concerned about his comfort than about basic fairness." David realized the situation was spiraling beyond his control, but he felt committed to the path he had chosen. The threat had been made, and backing down now would undermine his authority and potentially anger Mr. Blackwood even further. He pulled out his radio to contact airport security, a decision that would soon make headlines around the world. As David spoke quietly into his radio, James remained in his seat, maintaining his dignity while preparing for what he knew would be an humiliating and unjust removal from the aircraft. The other passengers watched in stunned silence as what should have been a routine flight preparation turned into a dramatic confrontation that would soon involve security personnel and, eventually, lawyers and judges. Within 10 minutes, 2 airport security officers appeared at the entrance to the first-class cabin. The sight of uniformed security personnel boarding the aircraft created a sense of drama that extended far beyond the first-class section. Passengers throughout the plane craned their necks to see what was happening, and several began taking photos and videos with their phones. Officer Sarah Collins and Officer Mark Thompson approached the situation with professional caution, clearly uncomfortable with what they were being asked to do. Both officers were veterans of airport security and had dealt with genuinely disruptive passengers, but the scene before them was unlike anything in their experience. "Good afternoon," Officer Collins said diplomatically. "We understand there's a passenger who's refusing to comply with crew instructions. Can someone explain the situation to us?" David quickly summarized the events, presenting the situation as a passenger refusing to follow crew directions about seating arrangements. However, his explanation was immediately challenged by several other passengers who had witnessed the entire confrontation. "That's not what happened at all," called out the elderly woman from seat 1C. "This soldier has been perfectly polite and reasonable. He's just trying to keep the seat he paid for, and they're treating him terribly because some rich man wants it." Officer Thompson studied James, taking in his military uniform and dignified demeanor. "Sir, can you tell us your version of what's happening here?" James stood respectfully and presented his boarding pass. "Officers, my name is Captain James Morrison, Royal Guard. I'm traveling home to my family on this ticket, which clearly shows seat 2A. I've been cooperative throughout this entire discussion, but I'm being asked to give up my assigned seat to accommodate another passenger's preferences. When I declined to voluntarily move, I was threatened with removal." The officers exchanged glances, both recognizing that this wasn't a typical disruptive passenger situation. Officer Collins examined James's boarding pass and identification, confirming that everything was in order. She then asked to speak with David privately. During their brief conversation, Officer Collins questioned the justification for removing a passenger who had committed no offense other than declining to give up his assigned seat. David struggled to provide a compelling legal basis for the removal, relying mainly on company policy about following crew instructions. Meanwhile, more passengers were becoming vocal in their support of James. A businessman from seat 2C called out, "This is completely wrong. I fly this airline regularly, and I've never seen anything this unfair. The man has done nothing wrong." Mr. Blackwood, sensing that public opinion was turning against him, attempted to justify his position. "This is simply about efficient customer service and accommodating established preferences. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable, just recognition of my status as a loyal customer." However, his explanation was met with skeptical looks and murmurs of disapproval from other passengers. Several people began openly expressing their disgust with the situation, with one woman saying loudly, "Status doesn't give you the right to steal someone else's seat." The officers returned to James, and Officer Collins spoke quietly but clearly. "Sir, while we understand the crew's position, we're not comfortable with removing you from the aircraft under these circumstances. You haven't violated any laws or regulations, and your ticket appears to be completely valid." This unexpected development caught David off guard. He had assumed that once security was involved, they would simply follow his instructions without question. The officer's reluctance to act created a new problem. He had escalated the situation to security involvement but now found himself without their support. Mr. Blackwood's frustration reached new heights as he realized the officers weren't going to simply remove James on command. "This is preposterous. I've been a customer of this airline for decades and I've never experienced such poor service. I want to speak to whoever is in charge of this entire operation." The commotion had now delayed the flight by nearly 30 minutes, and passengers throughout the aircraft were becoming increasingly restless. The captain himself eventually appeared in the first-class cabin, hoping to resolve the situation quickly, so the flight could depart. Captain Patricia Williams surveyed the scene with the experienced eye of someone who had dealt with countless passenger issues over her 20-year career. After brief conversations with both James and Mr. Blackwood, she made a decision that surprised everyone involved. "Gentlemen, after reviewing this situation, I've determined that Captain Morrison has the legal right to occupy seat 2A as indicated on his valid boarding pass. Mr. Blackwood, while I appreciate your loyalty to our airline, I cannot authorize the removal of a passenger who has committed no violation of our policies or federal regulations." The captain's decision was met with applause from several passengers, but it only intensified Mr. Blackwood's anger. "This is absolutely unacceptable. I'll be filing formal complaints with your company's management and I'll be taking my business elsewhere. This kind of treatment of valued customers is exactly why airlines are losing market share." David found himself in an extremely uncomfortable position, caught between his captain's decision and his concern about the complaints that were sure to follow. The situation had escalated far beyond what anyone had anticipated, and the resolution was satisfying to some but deeply frustrating to others. James remained gracious in victory, thanking the captain and officers for their professionalism. However, he was acutely aware that his refusal to give up his seat had created enemies within the airline organization, and he suspected this wouldn't be the end of the matter. The flight finally departed 45 minutes behind schedule, but the drama was far from over. Mr. Blackwood had reluctantly accepted seat 1A but spent much of the flight on his phone, speaking with what appeared to be lawyers and airline executives. James tried to enjoy his first-class experience, but the tension in the cabin made relaxation impossible. Several passengers approached James during the flight to express their support and outrage at how he had been treated. Many shared their own stories of poor treatment by airlines and praised him for standing up for his rights. A few even asked to take photos with him, viewing him as someone who had fought back against corporate bullying. However, James also overheard Mr. Blackwood making calls in which he described James as belligerent, uncooperative, and disruptive. These characterizations bore no resemblance to what had actually occurred, but James realized that powerful people often controlled the narrative of events through their influence and connections. When the flight landed in New York, James hoped the incident was behind him. He was eager to reunite with his family and put the unpleasant experience out of his mind. Sarah was waiting at the airport with their children, and the joy of seeing them again temporarily overshadowed the events on the plane. However, within days of returning home, James began receiving unexpected communications. First came a letter from the airline's legal department, suggesting that his disruptive behavior during the flight had violated their terms of service and that future bookings might be restricted. The letter also mentioned that other passengers had complained about the delay caused by his unreasonable demands. The characterization of events in the airline's letter was so distorted that James barely recognized it as describing the same incident he had experienced. According to their version, he had been aggressive, refused multiple reasonable accommodations, and had created a disturbance that endangered flight safety and passenger comfort. James was shocked by these accusations, particularly since multiple passengers had witnessed the entire event and could testify to his polite and reasonable behavior throughout the confrontation. He realized that the airline was attempting to rewrite history to protect itself from potential legal liability. Sarah was outraged when she read the letter. As a nurse, she understood the importance of accurate documentation and honest reporting, and the airline's version of events was clearly fabricated. "James, you can't let them get away with this. They're not just attacking you, they're attacking everyone who might stand up for their rights in the future." James consulted with a friend, who was a military lawyer, who immediately recognized the serious legal implications of the case. "This isn't just about your seat anymore, James. This is about discrimination, defamation, and corporate abuse of power. The airline's own actions have created a strong case against them." Word of the incident began to spread through social media, where several passengers who had been on the flight shared their videos and accounts of what had really happened. The contrast between the airline's official version and the eyewitness accounts was striking, and public opinion quickly turned against the airline. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a case of corporate discrimination against a military veteran. The airline found itself facing a public relations nightmare as the story spread across traditional media and social platforms. The hashtag Justice for Captain Morrison began trending, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of poor airline treatment. Within 2 weeks of the flight, James received a call from Elizabeth Harper, a prominent civil rights attorney, who specialized in discrimination cases. She had been following the story in the news and believed James had grounds for a significant lawsuit against the airline. "Captain Morrison, this case represents much more than a seating dispute," Elizabeth explained during their first meeting. "The airline's actions show a pattern of discrimination based on social class and wealth. Their subsequent defamation of your character compounds the legal issues significantly." The lawsuit, when filed, sought damages not only for the humiliation and discrimination James had suffered, but also for the airline's deliberate misrepresentation of events in their communications with him and the media. The case also included claims for violation of passenger rights and breach of contract. The airline initially attempted to dismiss the lawsuit as frivolous, but the combination of video evidence from passengers, witness testimonies, and the airline's own contradictory statements made their position increasingly untenable. Media coverage intensified as more details of the case became public. James never wanted to become a public figure or legal crusader, but he realized that his case could set important precedents for how airlines treat passengers. With support from his family and growing public backing, he committed to seeing the legal process through to its conclusion. The lawsuit would eventually result in significant changes to airline policies regarding seat assignments and passenger rights, but the personal cost to James and his family would be substantial. What had begun as a simple flight home had transformed into a battle for justice that would define the rest of his life and potentially protect the rights of countless future travelers.